we have Lee Camp, the most censored comedian in the country, I think, now. Is that
Quite
how you
possible.
introduce yourself, Lee?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, definitely the most censored. Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm most censored because some people like to say, well, Dave Chappelle and Joe Rogan. It's like they're still on the biggest
Are you
platforms
kidding
in
me?
America. They're
Yeah.
it doesn't count as censored. And then people are like, well, you got Louis C.K. He just won a Grammy.
Yeah, come on. Like, they just erased all of your content off of, like, it's like almost a decade of redacted, right? Everything off of YouTube. Like, thankfully, you have backups and everything. But I mean, like, they basically tried to erase you from the internet, And like,
Yeah.
and you're being like the harbinger of this mass censorship like from the beginning too, because you face things that I have never heard of anyone else facing, like Facebook capping how many people you could reach, like just insane, like novel, like censorship that apparently they pioneer on you.
Yeah, I was the test case for some of it. Yeah, my Facebook, which used to be my biggest platform, 330,000 followers, but it's been essentially shadow banned since 2016, about the time of a particular Bernie Sanders campaign, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can't really gain on Facebook. I can only lose followers, and they show my post to. I did the math once. It was like 0.1% of my followers actually see a post. So
It's ridiculous. 350,000 followers and you get like, less than 100,
yeah, you'll get like
like
100 shares or something. They're showing it to a tiny fraction of
that's
people.
insane.
And then at the same time that my that redacted tonight was banned on YouTube globally, my podcast Moment of Clarity was deleted from Spotify. So.
Wow. Wow. So, like, you and I have talked about this before, but I wonder if your thinking has changed. Where do you think this is going? Like, with the censorship that we have, do you think it's possible for change to happen in this country? Or do you think that, so I happen to believe that social media has empowered people in a way, like activists and like working people, to fight back against the machine and against the establishment in a way that they weren't able to before. Like the internet has empowered that. The internet has been a net positive basically for the working class because now we can communicate peer to peer. Like it used to be just that like the mass PA system, in the country was just television, and
Right.
television's one way communication. And then and then came about the internet, and the internet was two way, it was peer to peer. Social media allowed us to bypass gatekeepers of information. But now, like, especially since 2016 and then 2020, like you mentioned, like there's been this counter reaction from the elite and from the big tech companies, which have partnered with, the Democratic Party and Wall Street, and formed like, what Glenn Greenwald called like the new ruling coalition, you know, and they've basically fought to turn social media back into television and the internet back into television. You search something, you only see the results they want. You go onto YouTube, the algorithm only gives you what they want to see, and it's always leading you back to that and suppressing anything else. So, like, do you think that it's possible with existing social media and like the advantages that we gained with the internet to actually reach the point where we could have like a revolution, political, or otherwise, like mass systemic change in this country, before the social media companies would just kind of ban everybody? Or do you think that like before we triggered that point and like crossed that line, that the social media companies like Facebook, Twitter, all of them would just like mass ban, deplatform, erase everybody?
Well, they're doing their best, I think, in many ways. But yeah, you got it right that it really is. People need to look at it as a long term, and it's not that long, but a long term arc of this story of the internet. At first, it wasn't fast enough, and it wasn't in every home. I mean, it was only 10, 15 years ago that you honestly had internet in every home on every phone. Uh, and in that time, so social media and everything becomes big and in every home of America, around let's make up some years, 2005 to 2010. And then you see this like quickly mass movements just developing and popping off. You see Occupy, you see WikiLeaks, you see the Bernie Sanders movement, you see Black Lives Matter, you see all of these things happen very quickly over the span of just, 10 years. And I'd say Occupy was probably the big kind of like warning sign to the ruling elite that they had to shut down this ability to organize in this way, for people to get information out in this way. And then kind of the final nail in that coffin, to woefully mix my analogies, is it was the 2016 Bernie Sanders run. And they realized they had to kind of shut it down and get it back to a place where, you're right, they could have gatekeepers. They could make sure you're not really seeing kind of content that hadn't been analyzed by a larger, ruling elite structure of some sort. And they do, they did it with the biggest tech platforms in the world. Google, you only get certain results. And this was kind of done in many ways. It was done carefully. Like I said, I was shadow banned starting in 2016. They came out with kind of two hit pieces, and I think People's Party has dealt with something similar. They came out with it was just two hit pieces, but what it did was on me. One was NPR and one was New York Times. And what it did was, those can then be used as the top Google search results for anybody looking for me. So anybody who's like, hey, who's this Lee Cam fella? Oh, New York Times says he's a fraud and he's putting forward propaganda. And the other thing is, Wikipedia kind of counts as the history of the world right now. And what counts as a legit source on Wikipedia? Only New York Times or CNN or something. You could not have, I myself could say, Wikipedia is wrong, my entry's wrong, that's not even when or where I was born. And they would say, unless it was in the New York Times, you don't count.
Wikipedia must be written by the CIA. Like, it
is written.
Editing war over the People's Party. Wikipedia, actually.
Oh yeah, editing war. Yeah, there's been the editing war I know about was for Venezuela, where some of the lower editors said, hey, Juan Guaido is not the president of Venezuela. No one's ever voted for him to be the president of Venezuela. And the top editors said, oh, no, the U.S. has declared him the president of Venezuela. But yeah, Wikipedia is edited by 500 people, basically. But really, the top 50 are the main ones. And it's a bunch of white men who are doing the kind of Western imperialist view of the world in many ways. But anyway, that type of thing helps define those of us who need to be sidelined by the ruling elite. It's basically the white blood cells got activated around 2016, 2015, and they dealt with an infection in the empire. And the infection was all of us who speak out against the two-party system, speak out against the capitalist destruction of the world, speak out against the American empire, reveal the true truth. I know it sounds sad you have to say both of those words, the true truth of our world. But those of us who do that are the infection to the empire, and the white blood cells kicked in and attacked us. And like I said, it's not like the New York Times needs to come after me every day. They've done two hit pieces now, I guess, basically on me. And that's enough to be the top search results on Google and make sure everybody defines me in that way. Wikipedia just the other day, the top editor who is in charge of doing Western propaganda re-edited my Wikipedia page, which was already a kind of garbage page. But he deleted anything about my life that wasn't talked about by the New York Times. All true stuff, like the fact that I performed in New York City as a stand-up comic for years. And I think the reason all that was deleted, they say, oh, because it wasn't sourced well. Well, the real reason it was deleted is because they wanted to find me as nothing other than Russian agent. They want my bio to be shrunk down to just RT America must be a Russian agent. There you go. That's his entire story.
What the hell are they going to do now? What have they come up with a new angle on you? Is it like ex-Russian agent or something like that? Is that good enough? Do you still, are you gonna
Well,
like,
I do know, I purposely don't read them, but I do know that some of these outlets, because they've been asking for interviews with me, they want to now try and pressure Substack, which has Chris Hedges, Patreon, which I'm on, to also delete us. So they're kind
yeah,
of not done. The fact that they got RT America shut down with US sanctions wasn't enough. The fact that they got Redacted Tonight banned globally on YouTube wasn't enough. Now they're kind of chasing people outside of RT America to try and shut down our ability to make a living or have a platform now that we're no longer at RT America. So they're hoping to get Patreon to delete us or something like that. It really is sad. I mean, it's a total new level of McCarthyism, and the fact that you don't have that many people angry about it is really pathetic.
right. No, it's unbelievable. I'm always amazed by how much of like the left and the populist movement doesn't take issue with censorship, like until it affects them directly. It always starts with like the most, objectionable or like, detestable figures or whatever, like whoever they think is gonna, they're gonna be able to
Right.
ban.
It started with
You
Alex
know,
Jones. It started.
exactly. It started with Alex Jones. Yeah, and even before that, it also started with people who were saying that that COVID could have originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and so they also started banning people who were saying that.
Yeah, which it did, but the part that they,
Exactly.
well, I guess we don't know that it did, but it very well possibly could have. Uh, and the part of that, though, that they really wanted to suppress more so than just that initial statement was the U.S. involvement in the Wuhan lab.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that the US is researching, like, is participating with China in researching like biological agents and genetically engineering, it's insane. That's always one part of that that I always find crazy. But like, you know, so I mean, do you think though that in the current like playing that forward, that evolution of social media, people now, it's so cloistered, like you're in such a bubble in social media, you can feel it,
Yeah.
like people who are such amazing like new commentators, like Jackson Hinkle, awesome, like, it's so hard for you to grow, and reach people, and for us to reach people who are already, so they've like quarantined us,
Right.
and so it's like, do you
That's
think
one of
it's
the.
possible? Do you think it's possible to like to win with this social media environment? I think that social media is necessary for us to succeed. Like basically, so are they going to just erase us all before like we cross that like revolutionary threshold, or I don't know, like a new party succeeds, or something like that, or are or could that actually happen? Like, would that actually be permitted to happen? I mean, are there any like barriers, any lines they wouldn't cross after like kicking a president off and deplatforming people left and right?
I mean, no, I guess I don't think there's any threshold they wouldn't cross, but their ability to hold this paradigm, to prop up this I mean, it's being held up with duct tape and chewing gum right now. You have an economy that doesn't work for, and you know all this, but you have an economy that doesn't work for the vast majority of Americans. You have a completely gutted sense of community, infrastructure. People aren't even out to help fellow human beings anymore. We're told war is the answer. More war. Let's wear a little flag pin to show we want to send more weapons and arms and missiles around the world. War will come to us. World war will come to us wrapped in a peace sign. But there's just so many levels that this system can't continue anymore. Uh, Unfettered capitalism is by definition an idea of infinite growth on a planet with finite resource. So by definition, it has to end with environmental collapse of one form or another, and we're getting there. So I think that yes, they can do and will do just about anything. They will delete us from these platforms. They will silo us into an area where my Facebook is seen by just about no one. But I
I mean,
don't
they could
think
lie
they
to
can.
us about the reach.
What's that?
Why they could just lie to us about the reach,
And
like,
they do lie
and they
about
do.
about the
They
reach as
do.
well. But I think that it becomes incredibly difficult. It becomes more and more difficult to to succeed with that kind of propaganda when people can look out the window and go, no, this society isn't working for me. Like,
Right.
it's tougher and tougher to tell people, no, everything's fine. And you should care more about how we need to bomb this other country than you should care about your mom doesn't have health care. And people look at their mom and they go, I think I care more about that. Like,
Right.
I think I think we have a chance of winning because it is so tough to lie to people about the reality they can see in front of them.
Exactly. The reality that they feel day in and day out. So, like, just this past month, there was the $13.6 billion of like aid that was sent, which was like $8 billion worth of weapons. The majority of it was weapons, to Ukraine, so that like they can, bait a third world war and, and turn this into a never ending conflict. And at the same time, there was 15 billion in COVID assistance, that was shelved basically at the same time. And it's like, wow, okay. I mean, they didn't need to make that trade off, but they did, And so people
Right.
seeing that, I think it's like they're literally choosing arming people, sending weapons to kill people, halfway around the world, as opposed when people here don't have basic needs. Even the aid that is going to Ukraine is, first of all, we wouldn't need to send that aid if NATO weren't expanding and causing conflict in the first place. But also, there's people with that, like, who lack basic needs here in this country.
Yeah.
And so, like, I completely agree with you, and you got to
60 million during the pandemic, 60 million Americans used food banks. Like,
incredible. Incredible. I remember the lines. The
yeah.
lines, for them, they were like, you could see them like from an airplane. It was just miles and miles of lines outside food banks. Absolutely grotesque, absolutely disgusting. But you know, you've seen, a lot of wars. You've reported on a lot of wars, and
Well, I
I
don't know if
wonder.
I haven't seen them. I haven't been on the
No,
ground,
you
but
haven't been there. You haven't been there, right?
thank goodness.
Yes, is horrible, as some of the Ukrainian volunteers are finding out, being used as cannon fodder. Some of the Ukrainian foreign fighter volunteers. Um, yeah, no, it's horrific. But do you think that the public reaction to this is different than it has been before? Like, I think there was more of a boost that American presidents and the establishment could count on, like an increase in jingoism, and they've flooded the airwaves and television just in the way that they always have for every war. But Biden's favorability, because of what you brought up, that like people's lived reality, is just getting worse. It doesn't seem to be helping him. Like he's like momentarily like increased in popularity, and now he's like at like a historic low. So, I mean, do you think that the reaction is different, that it has the same impact that it's had before? Like this attempt to like
Well,
whip people into line with war.
yeah, it depends on, I guess, which war you're talking about. If you're talking about like the invasion of Iraq, I mean, there are people that see through these things. Obviously, most of our wars, most of our bombing, there is little to no coverage. Obama's final year, the Pentagon under him dropped 26,000 munitions in 1 year. The next year, Trump dropped 40,000. None of this was really talked about much. So most wars that we're involved in, most of the bombing and killing that we're involved in gets zero coverage. Uh, but if you're talking about the times that they decide to work us into a frothing, violent, lunacy, yeah, I mean, I guess it has some similarities to the invasion of Iraq. You do have people wearing ribbons down the street. You see flags on people's houses. It's similar in that way, but there are many that see through it. There's many that are talking about how they're not getting the real news from their mainstream media. There's many that are talking about that, and there was with the invasion of Iraq as well. The invasion of Iraq saw the largest global anti-war protest, I think, ever, and a lot of
Yeah,
people learned from that because it didn't change anything. It didn't
yeah,
stop our ruling elite from killing 1 million people in Iraq. And so we learned from the Iraq invasion that these people aren't answerable to us. They're not going to answer when tens of thousands march and say, we want peace and we don't want to bomb a sovereign country into oblivion for a fake story about WMD. But a lot of people do believe this garbage. Right now, I don't know if it's still the same, but was it a few weeks ago they did a poll and found out 74% of Americans believe that there should be a NATO-enforced no-fly zone over Ukraine, which, for those who don't understand what a no-fly zone means, it is basically nuclear war. It is saying NATO should shoot down any Russian jets. And the moment that happens, what do you think happens next? So 70-some% of Americans say, yeah, let's just march into nuclear war because they don't understand what a no-fly zone means. They don't understand the reality of it. They don't understand that it could equal nuclear war. And then a lot of them don't understand that nuclear war will probably mean the end of most of humanity. So it's just a level of breathtaking ignorance. But this ignorance is intentional by your mainstream media and by your government.
Yeah, I did see that. It was horrifying. Like some of the stats that have come out just about how authoritarian the Democratic Party and Democratic voters are becoming. 60% supporting more censorship on social media, big tech companies, even if it means abridging like First Amendment speech. It is horrific. We did today actually just put out a statement calling for disbanding NATO. Because that, as so many people, Chomsky, others have pointed out, is the origin of this crisis. I mean, the fact that we don't even see it as the Cold War having ended. I don't even think it's really like for the United States. I don't think that the Cold War for the geo political planners in the Pentagon and Wall Street, and in the White House and the permanent level of like bureaucrats, that like lead the Washington consensus, basically. The war never ended. The Cold War never ended. I mean, in 1991, you had Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld who were planning, okay, it's just going to enter a new stage. So they're planning, how are we going to, now that the Soviet Union has dissolved, are we going to go into those various spheres of influence that used to be, Soviet in Central Asia, Middle East, the Caucasus, and Eastern Europe, and we're going to develop a strategy to basically break off, those governments, whether by regime change, by war, by economic sanctions or pressure, by diplomacy, whatever we can.
And for a while, they essentially had at least a favorable government in Russia as well. I mean, they basically helped Yeltsin get reelected, and he was their guy. And when Putin was, I mean, these are capitalists. They're not communists at all. They're anti-communists. And when Putin was selected by Yeltsin, the U.S. viewed Putin as the next capitalist oligarch leader that they wanted to be running Russia, and they were fine with that. And then and Putin for a while was really kind of working with the United States, two capitalist countries. There was there were oil deals. There was a lot of exploiting of people and enriching a tiny oligarchy, both obviously in the U.S., but in Russia as well. And then Putin started basically standing up against U.S. empire to some degree. The first time that it was kind of really evident was Syria. And they have now obviously fully turned against Putin. And now they want this proxy war and it's succeeded in much of what the U.S. already wanted, in massive sanctions against Russia, ending the pipeline deals, ending a lot of fossil fuels. But they're kind of not, they didn't calibrate for a lot of the ramifications or the blowback. As Russia is demanding rubles for oil in across Europe, and Europe gets 40% of their oil from Russia, there's going to be massive economic ramifications. And the U.S. oligarchy doesn't really care because, who gets hurt the most during rough economic times? It's mainly not the rich. It's mainly the poor.
I think that this has backfired so spectacularly on the U.S. Because of the monetary aspect that you've covered, which so underpins basically global U.S. hegemony, and has since the end of the Second World War, through the gold standard, and then after that, to the present, the petrodollar. But now, with Saudi Arabia considering selling oil to the Chinese in yuan in their currency, with Putin demanding that Western Europe pay for natural gas, which they supply 35% of Western Europe's natural gas in rubles, you're talking about a much more fragmented monetary system where the dollar, you don't have as much demand for the dollar, is not rooted anymore in the, the most sought after commodity in the world. And that is going to be catastrophic to the United States. And I think that if it was Trump in power now, I think that the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN, they would be talking about how, oh my God, Trump is bringing about the end of like U.S. hegemony, but because it's Biden, they're like, okay, whatever. Oh, he called for regime change and a nuclear power. That's cool. Like they're just letting that completely go. This aspect of it is never covered in the mainstream media.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they think that you can sanction Russia into oblivion, but it seems highly unlikely that's going to be the case. And the big elephant in the room is China, and China is not turning against Russia, which is what the U.S. is trying to get to happen. They're trying to destroy the relationship between Russia and China because that is the most threatening thing right now to U.S. hegemony. But it's not working. And then of course there's India. It's just got a mere 1.38 billion people, which they also think that they can, keep as a feudal state. All of this comes down to the U.S. believes that every country should bow down to them and be a feudal state to our government. And we've seen how well that's worked for the world. I mean, we're destroying the world environmentally, but we're also incredible, militaristic activities across the globe. So, and most people in the world are still living on, what is it, $2-3 a day, over 50%,
Yeah.
I think. So the U.S. owning the world is not working out very well for most people and for our futures. So perhaps we should all have kind of more equal countries, and we should work together and cooperate in order to solve the world's problems rather than think we need to dominate everybody.
That's why one of the things that we called for as well is that the U.S. recognize and work diplomatically for the global recognition of the UN as the ultimate security authority. Not NATO. I mean, NATO obviously shouldn't exist. It should have dissolved with the Warsaw Pact. As opposed to encircling Russia for the last 30 years, growing from 16 to 30 members. Basically consuming most of Eastern Europe. And then at the same time, for the UN and the Security Council to actually be able to enforce global security, you have to disband permanent membership on the Security Council, and you have to remove basically the veto power that the United States, but also, the former like allied powers, Russia, China, France, the UK, have on that as well. Like, I wonder, like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it sounds good. I definitely agree on disbanding NATO. I mean, NATO, a lot of people, because the propaganda here in the US is that NATO is this lovely, friendly thing. And, if it's a NATO backed war, then it's a friendly war, which is, utterly hilarious and ridiculous. NATO destroyed Libya, took a country that was one of the most advanced in Africa in terms of development, and just turned it into battling warlords with open air slave markets. That's NATO for you. NATO is a military alliance that has destroyed countries, obliterated people. And so saying something is NATO backed, it is not a positive. It doesn't mean it's a good thing. It's like the Christmas wreath on the pedophile's home. It's just there to make you feel like everything's fine. But a NATO war is still a war, and it kills God knows how many civilians, and it's largely just bowing down to U.S. interests. And so, yeah, NATO is a military alliance that should definitely be disbanded.
It's not even North. It's not even a North Atlantic alliance anymore either. I mean, they've
Yeah.
basically built military bases all over Asia. They've tried to induct. They've extended invitations to, I think it was Colombia.
Yeah.
Countries in Latin America. And so it's obviously this U.S. like military, like it's supposed to basically lend legitimacy to U.S. military like exercise. So when the U.S. wanted to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, which you brought up, which here you would never know it from watching American media, but Libya was one of the richest, like most prosperous African states before it was overthrown by the United States and NATO, and the no-fly zone was established, which was authorized by the UN Security Council. But I remember Russia at the time, and I think it was Sergei Lavrov, their foreign minister, saying that we authorized a no-fly zone in Libya, and NATO took that as a mandate for regime change. Like they never authorized that, and that's why when Syria happened, basically they would not give authorization to anything else on the Security Council because they saw that anything that was authorized was just the mandate was completely blown out of proportion. It was used to destroy the country. And of course, what Gaddafi was trying to do, what he was really proposing, what the U.S. and France, there's declassified documents talking about how what the U.S. and France were really concerned about was that he was, proposing a United States of Africa. He was openly doing that, and he'd been storing gold and was proposing a gold-backed currency.
Yep.
For Libya.
Yeah, like you're mentioning, I did a video recently on how central banking and the petrodollar are kind of at the root of the vast majority of our invasions, bombings, economic destruction of other countries. Yes, there are other reasons here and there, but the ones we reserve our greatest ire for, our greatest, belligerence for, are those that are outside of our central banking arm and usually drop the dollar. It was true for Iraq. It was true for Libya. It was true for Syria. So many examples, Iran. So people should really look into that aspect of it. That is one of the biggest things. And as we mentioned at the beginning of this, that's becoming the case with Russia and China. They're developing a SWIFT system of their own outside of the US-backed SWIFT system. That is how banks communicate with each other. The US just recently, in their sanctions, cut Russia from many Russian banks from the SWIFT system. So, and Russia and China are developing their own. So that is part of the reason that the US wanted this proxy war in Ukraine right now.
I mean, there's I think it's like 2/3 of the countries in the world are part of like the Belt and Road Initiative in some way. It's completely expansive. If you've got Russia, China, and India, in any way allied, which is it absolutely seems to be accelerating, then that is a new source, an absolute new source, and transfer of power, from the United States, from U.S. hegemony to a much more multipolar, world. And, like you said, like the consequences of U.S. hegemony have been so obvious, just endless amounts of war. I think this country's been at war for like all but a few years in its entire existence. It's always been involved in a war. And so absolutely something more peaceful and something more collaborative is obviously necessary, and it's never going to be brought to you by the Democratic or the Republican parties. Those parties are going to
they agree on it all. Yeah.
Exactly, they agree on it all. They're the number one purveyors, and they will sooner turn this country into like a one party, state, just outright totalitarianism, take away the vote, or make it even more, hollow for as much as it is right now before they were to permit that. And so that's why, like, what I see the movement is doing right now is experimenting, the left and populist movement, as like, what kind of change is, what's going to be effective in like producing change. So I wonder, what do you think? Is it going to be within the electoral system? Is it going to be, is it going to be direct action? Is it going to be something else? Is there going to be some other kind of, trigger for mass change? We think at the People's Party that you can do both. You can work on electoral, you work to build a major new corporate free party, which we're doing, and at the same time you can work on actions. That those things go hand in hand. But I wonder, like, what kinds of change, give you the most hope? Like, what do you think has the most promise, basically?
I mean, the place I see promise is in. I mean, I feel like you have to throw all the shit at the wall and see what sticks. So, I love what you guys are doing because we have to build things that are outside of the two-party system. I also love what mutual aid is doing around the country. We saw a lot of strength in mutual aid during this pandemic when people were suffering so much and communities were coming together to help each other. I see hope in pipeline fights that have succeeded, against no national coverage, but they've succeeded in stopping a lot of pipelines because it becomes too expensive for the corporate entities to keep moving forward with them. I see hope in tree sitters blocking logging. I see hope in so many people across this country that are fighting for things and having successes. The divestment efforts, BDS, divestment from fossil fuels as well. There's so many places to see hope and success and really grow those and move them forward. And we really have to work in just so many different ways, because if we are going to stop the destruction of our world, the destruction of people's lives, it's going to be a death of a million bee stings that's going to move us to a new sustainable path forward.
I agree. I think when you attack them everywhere at once, they're more disoriented, they're less capable of handling it. There's so many different fronts. There's this kind of like perpetual argument, I think, in the movement about, is it better to like totally focus on one thing or not? And I completely believe in, diversity of tactics is, you take them on in all the different respects. Well,
Yep.
Lee, it's always freaking great talking to you, man. And so thanks for joining us on the People's Podcast. And where can people find you now?
Thanks a lot, man. Yeah. Patreon.com/Lee Camp is what I'm building up at the moment, and leecamp.com. So, yeah, I'm hoping to create something that has the same feel and comedy and passion of Redacted Tonight, even if it doesn't look the same in the big news studio. But hopefully I'll have enough small dollar patrons to create the next thing.
Well, I think you're pulling it off. I love the new segments you're making.
Thanks, man. You too. Keep fighting.
All right, everyone, keep fighting. It's been here. I'm Nick Brana with People's Party. Lee Camp over there, formerly was Redacted Tonight, now making his show. And so take care, everyone. We'll see you soon on the next People's Podcast episode.